The moment you hear about the Supreme Court's 9-year ruling, it's impossible not to feel a sudden jolt of urgency. Imagine waking up and realizing that a single decision has the potential to change gun laws in every state in the country, altering rights you thought were firmly established. This isn't a distant debate in Washington. It's happening now, and it could affect lawful gun owners everywhere, including you. The stakes are immediate, personal, and profound. Let me ask you this. If the Supreme Court can redefine gun law across all 50 states with a single ruling, what does that mean for your own rights and responsibilities as a lawful gun owner? Answer that in the comments. Let's get a real discussion going. Now, let's break down what actually happened. The Supreme Court issued a unanimous 9-0 decision that reshapes how states can regulate firearms. In my legal analysis, this ruling is unprecedented in scope because it directly clarifies the balance between state regulatory power and federal constitutional protections. Historically, states have had varying degrees of authority over firearms, some with restrictive laws, others more permissive. This ruling, however, establishes a clear baseline that all states must now acknowledge, and it has immediate implications for legislation, law enforcement, and everyday gun owners. From a constitutional perspective, the case touches primarily on the Second Amendment. There is a strong constitutional argument that the court's reasoning reinforces the principle that the right to keep and bear arms is fundamental, but it also acknowledges that states can implement regulations under certain conditions. Courts would likely examine each state law against this new framework to determine whether it aligns with the constitutional standards set by the Supreme Court. The ruling also intersects with Fourth and Fifth Amendment considerations, in my opinion. While the decision does not directly address search, seizure, or due process in this particular case, its implications extend to enforcement. If a state law is found incompatible with the ruling, any enforcement action could be challenged on constitutional grounds, highlighting the importance of procedural fairness and adherence to due process. Looking at federal versus state context, the decision creates a uniform national standard. Previously, gun laws were fragmented, leading to confusion and potential legal conflicts for citizens moving across state lines. Now, in my analysis, states must adjust their regulations to ensure compliance or risk legal challenges that could escalate to federal courts. Real-world impact is significant. For lawful gun owners, certain restrictions that were previously enforced differently across states may now be invalid, while other regulations may need careful review. In my opinion, the ruling doesn't mean unlimited freedom. It clarifies boundaries and emphasizes the importance of responsible gun ownership within those boundaries. Legal risks for non-compliance remain, as states will still enforce valid regulations under this new framework. Supporters of the ruling argue that it strengthens constitutional rights and provides clarity across all states. Critics express concern about public safety and the pace at which states must adjust laws. In my analysis, this balance between rights and regulation is precisely what the court considered, weighing precedent, public policy, and constitutional guarantees. The long-term implications are profound. This ruling will shape legislation, law enforcement policies, and judicial interpretation for years to come. Gun owners, legal professionals, and policymakers alike must understand not only what changed, but how to navigate this new legal landscape responsibly. Comment below, how do you think this ruling will impact your state and your rights? Share your thoughts, but remember to keep the discussion civil and informed. Now that we've established the magnitude of the Supreme Court's ruling, let's look at how all 50 states are being impacted. In my legal analysis, this decision doesn't just affect one or two jurisdictions, it sets a precedent that each state must acknowledge immediately. States with more restrictive gun laws will have to reassess whether those regulations comply with the constitutional standards clarified by the court. Even states traditionally known for lenient gun laws may need to ensure that any local restrictions or enforcement practices align with the ruling. Historically, this kind of nationwide recalibration has been rare. The last time the Supreme Court issued a ruling with such sweeping effects was in cases like District of Columbia versus Heller, which recognized an individual right to possess firearms. That decision reshaped law enforcement, legislation, and the understanding of constitutional rights nationwide. In my opinion, this new 9-year ruling carries similar weight, but extends into broader regulatory territory, affecting both possession and state-level control measures. From a practical perspective, lawful gun owners need to understand what this ruling means for their day-to-day rights. In my legal analysis, individuals should review state laws confirm that their possession and storage practices comply with the updated framework, and consult legal counsel if any uncertainty arises. The decision does not provide carte blanche to ignore safety regulations or mandatory registration requirements where those remain constitutional. Instead, it establishes clear boundaries for what is permissible and what may be challenged legally. Courts will likely examine challenges to state laws under the lens of this new ruling. For example, regulations that were previously considered routine, such as limits on magazine capacity or restrictions on certain firearm models, could now face immediate constitutional scrutiny. In my opinion, understanding which laws are affected and how courts are interpreting the ruling will be critical for both citizens and lawmakers. This ruling also reinforces the importance of compliance with procedural safeguards. While the Second Amendment protects certain rights, the Fourth and Fifth Amendments still govern due process, searches, and seizures. Law enforcement agencies must navigate these waters carefully, ensuring that enforcement aligns with both federal standards and state-specific nuances. In my analysis, this balance is essential for maintaining public trust and avoiding legal liability. Politically, this decision is likely to spark a wave of legislative activity. States may attempt to pass laws that fit within the new constitutional framework, while interest groups and advocacy organizations will analyze the ruling for potential challenges or opportunities. In my opinion, staying informed and engaged in these developments is critical, not just for gun owners, but for anyone interested in understanding how constitutional law evolves in real time. Let me ask you another question. Which state do you think will see the most immediate and dramatic changes as a result of this ruling? Comment below with your thoughts. We want to hear your informed perspectives on how this could play out locally and nationally. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, because in the next part we'll break down specific states, practical adjustments for gun owners, and the strategies legal experts are advising to navigate this historic change. Knowing the law isn't optional. It's essential for responsible ownership and staying on the right side of both state and federal regulations. Now let's dig deeper into the real-world consequences of this Supreme Court ruling for gun owners. In my legal analysis, the decision doesn't just exist on paper. It changes how law enforcement, state regulators, and even local authorities approach firearms. Some states may have previously treated certain firearm models or accessories as prohibited, but under this new 9-0 ruling, those laws could face immediate constitutional challenges. This means gun owners who were previously in a gray area may now find their rights clarified, but only if they understand the nuances and act responsibly. Consider enforcement first. Law enforcement agencies are now navigating a complex landscape. Officers must balance public safety concerns with adherence to the constitutional protections reinforced by the court. In my opinion, any misstep in enforcing outdated state regulations could lead to lawsuits or overturned cases, and that directly affects both officers and civilians. The ruling essentially sends a clear message. Adherence to constitutional principles takes precedence over inconsistent state restrictions. For lawful gun owners, practical steps are critical. This is not a moment to test limits recklessly, but a time to review personal compliance with both federal and state law. In my analysis, checking your permits, understanding updated regulations, and maintaining responsible storage and handling practices are essential. Courts would likely examine any legal disputes under the new ruling, and demonstrating responsible ownership will be a key factor in both compliance and legal defense. The ruling also raises long-term strategic questions. States may respond with legislation designed to stay within the court's framework while still aiming to regulate firearms for public safety. In my opinion, this creates a dynamic where lawmakers must innovate carefully. Any overly restrictive attempt could be challenged in court, while failure to regulate adequately might generate public concern. This tension will likely drive significant legal debate and policy adjustments over the next several years. Supreme Court precedent plays a pivotal role here. In previous landmark decisions like McDonald v. Chicago and District of Columbia v. Heller, the court established individual rights to bear arms while recognizing limited, reasonable regulation. This 9-0 decision reinforces that trajectory, but also adds clarity. Certain state laws that conflict with these constitutional protections are vulnerable. In my legal analysis, this underscores the necessity for citizens to understand both their rights and the evolving legal landscape. Ignorance is not a defense, but informed compliance is protection. Supporters of the ruling argue it restores clarity and protects constitutional rights nationwide, creating a uniform standard for all 50 states. Critics warn that rapid changes could strain enforcement and create confusion. In my opinion, these concerns are valid, but the ruling prioritizes legal consistency and constitutional fidelity over inconsistent local practices. Lawful, responsible gun owners are best served by understanding the ruling, consulting qualified legal counsel if necessary, and staying informed about state-level legislative responses. Let me ask you, which part of this Supreme Court ruling do you think will have the most immediate impact on gun owners in your state? Comment below with your perspective. We want to spark an informed and civil discussion. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, because in the next part we'll explore state-by-state reactions, real-life scenarios for lawful gun owners, and the practical steps you should take now to stay fully compliant. Knowledge is power, and understanding this ruling could make a tangible difference in how you exercise your rights safely and responsibly.